So like Fatin said, we took hyper-umbrella structures and we took in precedents. My precedent was the High Life Textile Factory. It's in Coyoacán, Mexico, and it was built in 1955. This was a sewing and ironing shop, and it stood as a thin shell steel reinforced concrete structure. And the complex was composed of a series of sloped shells that were in a sawtooth profile, and they were in an array of 3x4. And they are also being pierced by glass bricks, which flooded the entire factory with light. So the umbrella structures are generated by joining 4 straight edge high par surfaces, from which all diagonal lines will connect to a concave center point, which would be then resting on top of a column. And my design approach was to merge the hyper umbrella structure and the column. So a hybrid of the two would allow for intermediate spaces to be amplified. The structure would now be self-supporting, and it will have no cool joints, and it will have no need for columns. To do so, what I did was alter the outlining geometries at both ends, meanwhile moving these apart from one another in the X and Y direction axis, and rotating these in opposite directions. So afterwards, I moved on to adding a few more canopy structures that would come together to enclose the top portion of the cube, or at the end result, the building. And this will provide shelter. Meanwhile, the narrow bottom portion of these structures, they will free up spatially the building and the cube. And the hollow center would then ascend into inhabitable spaces that only generating, enclosed rooms within those interspaces. My site stands at the edge of Queens along the East River, almost directly across from the Roseville Island. And here I'm introducing a second public institution that takes advantage of the waterfront, and which is another public institution from the public library, which is centered on the map. So it's, in a way, it's kind of extending the park alongside, and what becomes on top of that industrial. The idea was to extend what's public into that industrial area on the top and encourage movement upwards. Otherwise, only residents of the new surrounding high-end apartments would appreciate daily views. So the site is also easily accessible by metro, with the port station, which is located east within a 10-minute walk. You also have rail lines from all over New York that come into Hunters Point Avenue, and you also have Long Island City train stations, which are both like 15 minutes of walks. And you also have a ferry line that it currently runs through the East River and connects Manhattan, Roosevelt Island, and Hunter Points. And there's actually a stop adjacent to the proposed site. And this is a roof plan view, a closer view into the site. So I'm taking over the corner, and I am taking this 3 different cubes that they're different as far as where this high part exits the building. Here you have a closer view. So the idea is that these hyperstructures create shelter on top and kind of like free up the ground underneath, and they serve as circulation and sort of like this courtyard that pierce through the building. I separated the program by the buildings with most, the program with more square footage will be at ground level, and as it ascends, I would have those that require less square footage. So I also implemented a ferry stop. So I would have on the bottom I would have restaurants, cafes, visitor centers, convenience stores. I have 2 classrooms and an auditorium. And then as you move on, in this building right here, you would have a cafeteria. Then you will have on top of that, you will have a digital library, and you have the running track that loops around at the top in between these surfaces, because there's very small square footage. And as far as circulation, it is at a corner point, so I took the two main axes, which was this one right here. Do you guys see my cursor? Yeah, okay. Will be this main axis right here, and this one coming along from Gentry Plaza, and the one coming in from this sidewalk in here, this one. Each volume would have two stairs that move up, and then you have an elevator that is usually down in the middle, which is the center structure that comes through. This is a diagram of scaffolding versus surfaces. So basically you have the hidden surfaces, the floor slabs, and you have division walls. And all of these are self-supporting, so there's no need for columns or anything like that. This is a section. And some of these hyper umbrellas I either enclosed, and you could get, and all the light comes from the top down into the bottom. Sometimes it would be piers, like having windows, or like you carve out windows, and then the bottom parts are usually like slanted off to bring in light on the bottom and an entrance. And another idea was to have the skate part running underneath all of this, using the legs of these high parts as surfaces to skate on. And you would also have the playground under the other one right here, which would still have this kind of like watery continuity. So I don't have per se like a flat surface underneath. The idea was to have a flat surface, like a flat line on the top, and then the ground will be alternating.
Annie, we have about 1 more minute left.
Oh, okay. Let me show you the floor plan. This will be a floor plan cutting through the second floor. So here I'm cutting through the auditorium. Here is the cafe and the exhibition space. And this will be the courts, the courts, racquetball courts. And then this is a closer look at that. So each floor plate is different, and it gets tighter as you move up. And the spaces the floor is different in each. And this is a view far out into the side. This is a closer look after stopping at the ferry terminal. And all the ground you can see here is alternating. This will be a shot of the interior space. And this is the running track that you have right above, like moving in between these surfaces. And what I did, I didn't create like, I didn't create just walls. Like I kind of like folded down from these high parts and created like this curved walls that reveal that structure. Like you can see it here. And you could also see it here, all these that kind of carve out and become like terraces. This is another view, and let me show you the video. And this is from looking down from the playground. So sorry.
Ok, mamá, te lo voy a decir. Sí, sí, sí.
All right. Albert, I'm sure you have some questions about materiality.
Yes.
This is great, Annie. So maybe just pick a view that we could stop on
Yeah.
to discuss.
Yeah.
Could you go to a section, please?
Yes.
I mean, I love the complexity of the project. The first model you made was super interesting, and I think what you've developed is really dynamic, and it really invokes discovery. Like I would imagine, like if I saw this building, I would want to explore the whole thing. One thing I noticed though is it seems to be like you have this structure that's cutting through this other structure, and in a way, I think that they could maybe relate more together. And some maybe it's like I noticed sometimes you have these like cut through structures as solid, and sometimes they're all glass. But in other cases, you have this glass box. Then these structures that are cutting through are also glass. So maybe like taking some inspiration from like how Stephen Hall does some. I know he has this one natural history museum where he does a similar thing. He's cutting through the ceiling with these really organic kind of shapes or these cut throughs, and they're all like light filled in glass, and the exterior of the building is all opaque. So it's like this contrast between light and shadow is really nice. So I think it gives more presence to those really beautiful moments where you're cutting through this form, these like this Boolean operation, whenever you have that contrast. So I think in some cases I'd like to see more of that contrast, and also in some of these spaces, I think that you could definitely use them for circulation more. So I noticed in some cases you have these you're actually walking around these forms, but I think like what's really interesting is to actually have the circulation inside of these cut throughs. So you're really experiencing that really dynamic structure that you created. I think would be a great opportunity. I'm also really curious about the condition. I think it's really awesome that you engage with the water and your project goes into the water. I think that's awesome. I would love to see more detail on how that interaction plays out with this really organic form that you created.
Yeah, no, great. And I do have, my circulation does go through in through these hyper surfaces. I just didn't fully develop them, but I don't know if you remember from my diagram. They will go, they are inside. I just didn't like model it per se. But yeah, the idea is that you would go, even the elevator will be from it.
Yeah, I think the project has a lot of potential. I think there's a lot of really nice elements, but maybe maybe you want to highlight those moments more by not making all these exterior boxes all glass, and then having some of the cut throughs as glass. Maybe you want to have more of a contrast where the outside is like a different like opaque material than maybe the ones that are cutting through are these like light filled atriums, or the reverse. If it's a glass box on the outside, maybe these cut throughs are opaque and their own kind of condition on the inside. You get like
Right.
this moment of transition or change that becomes this really wow moment.
Right, right.
So speaking of hybrids, I sort of see your project as the hybrid of Toyo Ito and Candela or something like that, where you're starting to take the logic of the column as space and sort of turn it into surface. And even the qualities, I think, of some of the spaces and renderings that you have it feels like some sort of, yeah, some sort of amalgamation between the two of those influences. Um, the thing that I think it's a great project. I love the spatial potential of the columns. I sort of wish that that it seems like you're drawing a square up here and a square down here, and then you're doing whatever between them. And I think that the running track and maybe even the figures of the skate park provide an opportunity on some of these datums that you're using in the project. Like I think the column, the transition might need one or two more layers to it, kind of like Toyo Ito does in Sendai, where it kind of dances around more. It would have been an interesting experiment to run, where the figures that you use to make the high pars aren't squares, where they start to take on some of the edges and curves of the track.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Annie felt very strongly about the cubes this semester.
Then make some square running tracks.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's it's really beautiful, your project. I love the contrast, you know, these very organic versus the square, and how these pieces are floating, and there's a lot of dynamic feel of these shapes kind of projecting into the water, and I love also how, you know, the city's coming through but then also changing directions, so it's kind of a really active site. I think you know, I would agree with the running track and the skate park being sort of a little bit kind of separated from these other very active piece coming onto the land, and I'm also wondering how these two could kind of have a more interconnected dialogue, maybe a more powerful one, without being too much, right? Because it's kind of a fine line, how active and complex your project is. Adding more complexity and more relationships may make it yeah, go beyond what you know, what we would desire. But yeah, I guess the skate park and all the land in the main you know, kind of a datum, it has not been under kind of your attention that much as the rest of the structures. So I do really like also how you approach the water in a very kind of aggressive way, and yeah, there's something about these lines at the top for the running track, kind of even wanting to connect to what's happened below, or even maybe become in circulation. But that's kind of the difficult part. I'm also having a hard time having kind of how this geometry of the running track, it's now right now kind of overlapping with the rest of the geometries. But overall, I do really like the you know, your strategy. One other comment I have, I see some vegetation happening, and I think this is quite kind of an exciting and powerful way to also think about the land where these structures are arriving. And I wonder if those are also something you want to kind of think about more, maybe in relationship also of the arrival points, because these moments that touch the ground, they seem to be very light on the ground. Instead, they come with so much power from the top. You know, how is the land receiving them, or how are they really going into the land and provoking a moment there. So I think this image is a good one to maybe give another thought to that.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We should move on to the next one, but great work, Annie.
Thank you.
I think you have really great graphics. All semester, your graphics have been great, and project looks good. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Hanan, you're next.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay. Are you guys able to see it? Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Hanan Majid, and my site is located on the northern part of Long Island. I thought that this site was really interesting. It's located in a very industrial area, while at the same time, it's still looking over the triangle with the Roosevelt Island, the UN building, and Stephen Hall. So I thought it was a great connection between them. So the site conditions right now are, it's an empty site with 3 lakes that I had to sort of develop around the lakes. So my projection onto the site, I focused on the hyperbolic paraboloids that I was working on all semester. So basically, the paraboloids I worked with Felix Candela he focused a lot on 3 points and how these 3 points connected. So on the site, I started to stitch those 3 points from corner to corner, how I split the site, and how I reflected these unfolding elements onto the site. So with the program, I started to focus on these 3 layers. So I focused on the green area, which is the importance of the river's edge, and then the importance of these 2 warehouses that I had to focus on, which is the orange area, stitching it with that warehouse area, and then the purple with the southern area of the warehouse, and then the rest of the site just opens up onto the street. So from there, my program is, so you would have the cafe, the indoor theater, and the digital library all in this yellow and orange area stitched together. And then the green would be the skate park. I thought it would be important to place it overlooking Manhattan. And then the gym and the locker rooms and the racquetball courts were in that southern purple area. And then as you can see, the pink area, I created this normalized grid pattern, which is what you normally see in Manhattan, is the grid pattern. So with all of this chaos that's going on with these hyperbolic paraboloids and all of these lines, that pink area starts to become a looped running track that then weaves into the site and then into the hypars and out of the hyperbolic paraboloids. So this is the forms that I'm working with. So as you can see, all of the enclosed areas are colored into these shells, and then this is a greater view of the running track and how it loops around and into the hyperbolic paraboloids. So as you can see, also I reflected the indoor spaces being just white so that they can pop out more. So then the rest, the great view would just be the open space on the site. Even if I may walk through. Can you see the video?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to give a clear explanation as to how I got these forms. So the precedent that I was studying was Felix Candela's nightclub located in Acapulco, Mexico. So the way I worked it out with my cube is basically Felix Candela, as you can see in these purple drawings. He worked with a plane, and then he extruded 2 points up, creating this hyperbolic form, and then he split it into a 45-degree angle, which created these shells that he symmetrically had 3 shells and connected them together. So what I did with my cube, as you can see on the upper right side, is I took one corner of the cube and split it into these 3 points, referencing Candela's hyperbolic paraboloids. So as I focused on these 3 points that connected onto the cube, I started to get this split of one face in half. So then with that, I took it onto the next corner of the cube, as you can see on the bottom, and I started to split each face in half, and then from those half points, connecting those 3 hyperbolic points from there. And then
Do you have photos of this cube that you built?
I do. They're all in here. So, so as you can see, like on this top right one, I split this facade with this corner face in 3. And then, so I basically started to connect these points, and I broke up the cube, focusing on those half points and finding these spatial conditions to work with the hyperbolic paraboloids. And then that's when I referenced it onto the site. You can see the connection between my cube and the site and how these points were referenced on the site. Yeah,
Great.
got it.
All right. Maybe go to an overview image somewhere where we could, someplace that best describes the project.
Should I leave it on a render or? This one.
I know, maybe show us your building. Like, yeah, okay. It was just delayed.
Okay.
All right. Can you make it full screen, Hannah?
Yeah.
To me, maybe I'll just jumpstart it. To me, guys, I don't know if it was clear to everyone, but she found this very unique site in the neighborhood where there are these like mysterious ponds. Maybe you could back up to that, Hannah. And we can't quite figure out what they are. They almost look like nuclear reactor fuel ponds. They're bizarre. See them here. There are these weird objects in there. This TLC training center is like an electrical utility building, and it's jettied off from the East River. So, you know, to me, this is where the tension of the project exists. Like, how do you
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Please.
What is that double black line that shows up in the plan here and shows up in all these drawings?
Oh, that's the underground subways.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Should be a dash line, I guess. Anyway, yeah, the tension between, you know, how to remediate this, cover it up, you know, plan around it, design around it, integrate it, and I don't know if that came through, but you know, throughout that's been like a concern of the project.
Yeah, I guess I can start. I really enjoyed the project in section, and the roof structures that you were creating. I think are really beautiful. I would imagine it'd be really nice to walk through that space, and the shadows that you're getting makes this kind of like optical illusion in some of the renderings, which I thought was really interesting. Um, I would say maybe one thing that could maybe be a little bit improved. You do have this water condition on your site, and I would imagine there's a lot of landscape strategies that you could incorporate. So I would say in some cases you have a lot of hardscape and a lot of impervious pavement covering the landscape. And I think it might have been interesting to maybe think about some landscape strategies of how you maybe remediate some of the water and use that connection from these ponds that are on the land side versus the connection to the water side, and maybe using the structure in a way that you can create a relationship between the landscape. So the roofs, these beautiful surfaces you're creating on the roofs can also maybe have some kind of influence on the landscape. So there's more of a dynamic dialogue between the two. I think might be a way that you could push it a little bit further. Other than that, I think the sections are beautiful, and the drawings are very nice. And I would imagine the spaces that you're creating would be really amazing to experience inside.
Thank you.
Can you go to an overall view?
I can put my render instead.
Yeah, that's good. That's fine. I feel like there's something about the brief and there's something about the premise of the studio that's about even the way that you guys are sampling your cubes across the site that should produce, like within a kind of let's say self-similar operation, you should get a lot of diversity that comes out of the hybridization. And so for me, I really think I agree with the comment. This is I think it's a clear site strategy. I think it's kind of an elegant project, but I'm not sure that it feels a little homogenous to me in terms of like even the scales of the arcs that you're using. And I'm wondering if there's something, even looking back at the cube, that would yield like more diversity, more different kinds of experiences of the space. Even here, again, the ground plane is sort of treated relatively neutral. It's kind of got compositional arcs on the ground, and then the sort of the landscape parts of it are all roof. In terms of like the experience of landscape and space and that sort of thing. So I think it's a great project, but if there was something that I think there's an opportunity there to sort of explore the technique that you've developed at different scales that would produce a sort of wilder difference across the site.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Hello, Hannah. I agree. It's I love the images, especially in your video where the transitions between the interior and the exterior are happening. You have these moments where there's a pergola, there's light coming through. I'm not sure this is a good image to really understand exactly all of the roofs and how the transition goes. Maybe if you can go to another view, you can just scroll. I guess I kind of love that, and how your project is it's really open to this possibility of transitions and different phases and foldings. I yeah, these are great. So outdoor spaces are also sort of enclosed. So maybe not all of diagrams are expressing that enough. How the interior is not really one volume, one box, but it's really composed of different layers, right? Before you get to the indoors, there are these moments with roofs and other elements that are giving you this transition. And I think that's that one of the most powerful moments in the project. I do agree, everything at the surface level of the ground could also gain a lot of more movement, right? Kind of responding to what's happening above in a dialogue, especially the relationship with the water. I was thinking the same thing than Albert commented. But then I also wonder about how the relationship with the edges is, right? Because you have, for example, in the water, I can see in this lower image, there are these moments where the structures are projected into the water, but then the relationship with the city, it's very much like just a line. So I'm wondering if you could also reinforce and how would the strategy of connecting to the city be, right? Within these same parameters that you're using for the creation of a space and surfaces.
Okay. That's great. Thank you.
I would just add, Hannon, that I think there's it's not clear to me, even looking at these renderings, if your entire building exists as exterior space, which could be okay. But the relation between interior and exterior to me is not clearly established here. And I think there's a nice process. The models were so beautiful, especially the early cube studies, so great. And I kind of like the way that this ends like this, but I think the in-between stuff is not connective. I think the plans, everything remains very diagrammatic, and then it leads to like these realistic renderings. And I think there's still an in-between step that maybe you could fill in a little bit more.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, we'd love to see inside.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like most of my renders were about the circulation and outdoor space. Like I could have put more. Yeah. On the video, I showed the library and how the water intruded inside the library. So that was one of the spaces.
Yeah, like I want to even see these people swimming here in this remediation pond.
Even how the materials are changing while they approach the water, right? What happens when these materials reach the water, right? Is it the same or something is happening in order to even approach the water?
Yeah. Like to me, it would be like as you see them now, these materials are concrete shells, and then as it retreats into the water, it just becomes this rib structure that connects into the water. I could have shown that more.
Yeah, I also think maybe to zoom back out a little bit and now stitch it back into the kind of urban edge. I think what Sarah said about the edges is great. How does it now like stitch back into all those edges? Like the existing edges, the jogging paths, how does it extend them, reconnect them? It's pretty high up on the site, so it's got a lot of potential to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you ever find out what the ponds are?
No, I wasn't able to.
Okay. Fish farms. Great. All right. Thank you, Hanan.
Thank you.
Great work. Okay.
Thanks.
And Anna, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Great.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ana Paula Castellano. Thank you for joining my classmate tonight today. During this past year, we have been studying Felix Candela's architecture. This design takes the folded high power paraboloids, which I'll explain later on, that Candela used to join ground walls and roofs, changing the edges of the interior volumes. It also uses the edges of the basin that I chose as my site to revitalize the space that has been unused for some time, and to connect the two sides of the city surrounding the basin to create a space of community and collaboration. So here I have the site, so the image that Professor GELPI showed in the beginning with the triangle, and then zoomed in. So I'm taking over this basin here. And the basin is a 500-foot long man-made inlet. It was created in 1868, and this area was predominantly used for oil refineries and factories. why I chose this site was because it kind of relates to my precedent site. My precedent site is a subway station in Mexico, and it sits in between the space that has commercial zoning to the north, residential to the west, and then governmental to the east and south. And this one has very heavy industrial to the north, some residential to the right, and then heavily commercial and mixed use to the south. So this is my president, Metro Candelaria, built in 1968. It was used using folded high bars to create these columns that connect at a star-shaped column start, and then they end up as a hexagon. And then here, we brought our studies from Candela's forms into our cube project to create spatial diagrams for the development of our projects. So I took the capital of the Candela column from Metro Candelaria and I flipped it over, and then I sliced it in half here, and I moved this central vertical point where all of these high bars meet to the corner. So then I sliced it in half to create this transition from a vertical plane into a horizontal one. And then I mirrored that to create this cube here. And these are some elevations from it. Here I have a program diagram. I decided to split the program into two categories in between physically active and then mentally active. I kept the physically active to the north since it is comprised of less indoor functions. Like it has less indoor functions because it has mainly outdoor, so those are out on the inlet. And then I kept the mentally active to the south since there's a more space down there and to fit all of the site. And then I kept the central area here open as an entrance promenade leading out into the skate park, playground, and jogging track. And here's some entry points for my project, so you can enter from both sides here, the center entrance promenade, and then you can even access from the edge here, from this park area here, and then this is just the area next to this warehouse, but basically connecting the edge of the city and then the inside of the city into the site. Here I have a ground floor plan. Have the theater here, cafe, classrooms, the library and bookstore. Here, racquetball courts, locker, shower, and then the indoor gym. And then out here is the skate park. And then here, jogging track with the outdoor classrooms here on these edges that peel up. Next, I have the roof plan. I decided to use like a gradient to draw these roof structures since it's a little hard to see high bars in 2D. So the gradient kind of lets you see where these kind of dip down and come back up on the site. And then here I have my video. And then I wanted to focus on this, which was the last of the diagrams. This shows how the forms come from ground to make walls and create roof. And I basically used this part from my Candela transformation to create these. And I would peel up where I wanted to be roof at the end of the structure, and then I would peel it, like flip it back down to create the ground. And then here it is a little closer so you all can see how it comes up and creates these different section cuts throughout the project. And then I have some summary boards, but now I'd like to open the floor to any comments.
Great.
Anna, I think the project is really like the way that you approach this development of this new ground and roofscape, I think is really sensitive and beautiful. I think it's a really nice how you have these transitions and you're really focusing on, you know, not just like leaving, you're really designed and developed the groundscape and the landscape towards the water. And I really enjoyed that about the project. And I think there's a lot of potential for landscape architecture design there. I think it's great that you have this transition from this roof that becomes the ground, and then you have these moments where it comes up and gets higher. I would have pushed that maybe even a little bit further and exaggerated those moments where it goes higher to maybe accentuate views to the river, maybe even bring some of those where instead of just going up, also bringing those down into the water to create this softer edge for the water. I think it would be a really nice to have a little bit more of that exaggeration happening. There's a project called Flowing Gardens that it has a similar kind of elongated site, and it's kind of the reverse of yours where it starts with a landscape and then that landscape eventually rises up and becomes the roof for these gallery spaces that overlook the water. I'm going to put it in the chat for you because I think it's an interesting comparison between your project. It's basically the same thing but flipped.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm happy to say a couple of things. And I apologize for being quiet for the last couple of students, but Anna, because I know you, I can be a little bit more direct. I mean, first off, great project and all. Yeah. Anyway, it is a great project, but I just want to point out a couple of things that I think could be really helpful for you going forward. And then I just wrote a little list and then I'll elaborate on them. But one is to inhabit the project instead of floating above it. Start with perspectives from ground level. Start with the perspectives from ground level. Use the logic of structure. Don't fight it. Inhabit the program as somebody using the spaces. And then connect to context. Don't be insular. And what I mean by all these things is that you started, I think your instinct to choose this site was fantastic, right? This is a really interesting site. But then as you've been manipulating these forms and sculpting this project, you've been doing it from above as if you were sort of operating on a landscape that was, you know, below you, thousands of feet below. Instead, I think if you were building this up out of the site, it would be a much stronger project. And that's where, I mean, that you should be starting with perspectives from the ground level. Being inside the site and looking out from it would be so much more powerful than starting as somebody, you know, again, arranging forms below you and then only doing the sort of the perspective views at the end to see what you've done. Because what that'll ultimately do is help you connect to the context instead of being insular. And that's the biggest one. It's what one of the things that I found teaching in Miami is that there is a habit that we all have here of making projects that are incredibly insular, right? As if they operate in just within the property lines of their own site and nowhere else. Your project is in this extraordinary site and it has, you know, we keep calling them site conditions, but they're more than conditions, right? I mean, this thing is on the East River and it has this view of this Louis Kahn project. It has a view of the United Nations. It's got some really powerful visual connections across the river, but we don't really see those being things that motivate the project. We see them at the end in the renderings, but we don't see it really driving where you put program elements, for example. And then at the other end of the project where you face whatever that boulevard is, that's a huge missed opportunity there, right? Because whatever that street is at the east end of your project, it is a street that is, the example of what Hunters Point is going through, right? It's right now, your end of the street is basically some kind of industrial zone. It's probably all semi-trailers and diesel-powered buses and really awful stuff like that, probably all cracked up asphalt. But just to the south of you is this really high bourgeois apartments that have been built on those former industrial lands. And so what you could be doing there is looking at how your project engages that street in order to set the tone for how the rest of that neighborhood can be developed. But what you've ended up doing is taking your high power structures and sort of pulling them up out of the ground there. So you've created this thing that looks, I mean, it is the diagram of insulation, right? Where you, you know, it's as if the sidewalk kind of curls up onto your project and your project is perfectly opaque to the street. I mean, to walk on that street, just imagine walking on that street, you're facing your project, you're just seeing this kind of barrier of concrete. And so that's an example of where I think you've got to inhabit the site at ground level. And then the one other thing I'll say about those, well, two things about the program. One is that remember that every program element has a relationship to the world outside, not just to your site, but to the broader world outside. Your reading room from your library, your skate park, each of those has a relationship to the United Nations, to the rest of Hunter Point. What are those relationships, right? Those are the simple views that I would love to see as the things that started this whole project. And then the other thing about the program too is, you know, inhabit these things as if you're using them. Your library, for example, go in there as a reader. What is it like to sit there with a book or a computer and just sit in that space? And if you're a runner, and I cannot stress this enough, right? Because this is something that was driving me crazy looking at the last couple of projects. If you're a runner, imagine yourself running in that those spaces. I mean, I don't even like running, but I'm looking at the way that you guys are setting up these running tracks and I'm kind of frightened by them, right? I mean, these sudden quick jogs, I mean, that I could feel that in my hips. It felt painful, right? I was having this somatic response. I think that you guys have got to imagine these sites as somebody using them. And the one, you know, the one thing I'll say about the jogging thing, right, is because the jogging thing was part of that, the National Library project by Shumi. And Shumi incorporates these running tracks into a lot of these amazing unbuilt projects. But he always leaves the running track as an actual running track, like the figure of an actual Olympic running track is there as a recognizable element that acts as a foil to all the other things that are happening in the program. So use the logic of running or reading or whatever goes on in these spaces and use that to motivate the project.
In fact, he built the running track in the University of Cincinnati project.
Oh.
He actually, you know, the one with the triangular windows.
Yeah, the athletic facility.
Yeah.
Actually, can I just say one thing about and that's one, and then I'll just shut up for the rest of the projects. But as far as how you use precedents, y'all look at your precedents and don't just glance at them like you're flipping through, like, I like this, I like that. Think about these projects, right? And think about them critically. Like you guys had a chance to go to the Hunters Point Library, right? And as much as I love Stephen Hull's work, holy cow, that project has a couple of huge freaking problems in it. And they're really instructive to us as architects. One is that he had this whole idea, right, that it had to have these like cascading tiers of seating where you could then look out across the river. Great idea, right? I loved it when Snoetta did it in Alexandria. But the problem with Stephen Hull's project is that he created a project that is literally inaccessible to anybody who can't walk up and down steps. And that's unconscionable. It's also not legal. But he did that, and then on top of that, he spent probably twice as much money as he needed to on this project. And that's the other lesson for us all as architects. He spent so much money on that project. And I remember when I was an architecture student, I was like, oh, who cares about budget? Well, I'll tell you who cares about budget. Is it because they spent twice as much on that library? There's a whole other library that will never get built in New York because of that project. So these are just some of those things. Learn from these precedents, right? I mean, sorry, and then I'll just stop. And I know
yeah, we discussed that a lot.
Anyway, it's a beautiful project, Anna. And I'm sorry that I had to unload my frustration with else, but that's, sorry, I'll stop now. I'm just gonna mute myself.
Don't stop, David. We want to hear frustrations throughout the day.
Yeah, I think a good rant will break this up. Yeah, my instinct was about the site too, is that it seems like it's just ignorant of the city side, because I think the site's amazing as well. And so like if you're going to go mostly landscape, I think the roofs of the buildings that you're proposing are really important, and they seem unaddressed. And if you're going to go the other way, which probably would be the way that I'd think about, is like, how do I create a feeling along, I guess it's Vernon Boulevard there, that feels like that speculates on the future of that fabric and that edge, and still it allows a way to be porous and bring people out to the water. And I think the precedent that was sent by Albert, the Plasma Studio thing, I think is actually a decent example where landscape becomes really strong building at the other end. So yeah, it's another one of these that seems to be, and I like a lot about the project. And I think it's actually, I think what I like about most of these is just I guess I'm learning it's hard to screw up the hypar. You know, like the hypar is a really good one to do something interesting with, but I just don't see the potential for kind of diverse kinds of articulation or experience in this one again. So like if you're going to go landscape, go really hard landscape and make the landform buildings work more. If not, then I think there's an opportunity to really make the project feel more urban on one side and transition to landscape in a stronger way on the other side. But it's a nice project.
Thank you.
Hi, Anna. I'm going to just make a quick comment on, in addition to what Mark just said about transitioning from the urban to the landscape or from the urban to the water. If you can go to one of your maybe views from the top or plan or something like that. That one, the red one actually, if you can go back one more back, one forward, I think. Go one more. No. Well, there's one where your kind of structure lines are red.
Oh, here.
Yeah, yeah. I like this image, right? It really connects with a topographical image. And what I'm wondering is what happened with the red lines, where the kind of a city area and the water area are coming together, right? Mm-hmm. You felt maybe shy about how those two would connect, right? And I think maybe there's a key there for that transition and connection to the city, right? You want to invite in, people and users into your project and really open up to certain areas of the city and create cityscape in other areas. So, maybe this is an opportunity. How are these kind of lines that are perpendicular to this channel of water coming in going to transition and into these other more urban situation? And think about a zebra, right? How the pattern, it's changing from the legs to the torso, and how many ways could there be to create this transition? And I'm also kind of having in mind from just dealing with water issues, creating an edge that it's also a filter, right? Learning a little bit from D9, the living edge, and how also this structure can be functional somehow, right? In these regards, especially in these areas that are so industrial. We know, remediation needs to happen. So keeping that in mind, I think this building can be also a machine for, cleaning the water, actually cleaning water coming into the water. And last comment is, how about also making a deeper hybrid, between the program and the landscape, right? So all the program right now is at the edge of the city. But in reality, the city is also the boundary of your lot. So we don't know what can happen in these areas, but I think this feels like a very slim piece of land. But in reality, when you go there, it's kind of a wide. How wide is the land between the building next door?
Between the
Between
width
the
of
water and
the length here is 500, and I believe this must be like 70.
70, yeah. So you might have stretches of land that range from, I don't know, 10 to 50 in some points, maybe, right? So there is also the opportunity of adding program to this edge. That's what I was going for. And maybe that's something to think about, how program goes in that edge and how the transition between the built areas of that more landscape edge are happening. But I think you have really good intuitions in how to attack the project. And it's just starting for the site. I also, when I saw the general map, I thought that's a really cool site I would like to work on. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Great work, Anna. And Anna probably had more iterations of process than anyone. I wish you would have shown those, Anna, because I think she got to the kind of organizational diagram later, so it just ran out of a little bit of time here. I think she would address a lot of these comments, but it was a great process and great work this semester, Anna. So try to fill in those blanks with the suggestions. I think you can add a lot to this. Great work.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Okay. Monica, are you ready?
I am.
Great.
Let me share my screen. Hi, my name is Monica Spiteri, and the idea for my design was to reprogram a space while maintaining its original essence. The integration of interior and exterior spaces creates a hybrid connection between the various programs, while the elevated landscape recreates the concept of the conoid sawtooth vaults, offering an exciting topography and incredible views to its visitors. And you will understand a little bit more about the conoid sawtooth vaults later in the presentation when I mention Candela's precedent. So as we mentioned before, the site is in Queens, Long Island, and I specifically chose an existing historical factory brick building. A couple of the reasons why I chose it was its connection to the water. It's on 2 of its sides. Also the brick facade. And then the Candela's precedent is mainly a roof. So the idea of placing a roof on top of a roof, creating this really interesting hybrid element. So we all created a cube inspired on our precedent. And what I did here was I unfolded the different faces to help me design the landscape as well as the volumes for the buildings. Some of the diagrams here, you can see the existing building and then the new landscape on top of the building, creating all this interesting volumes. And then on the bottom right, you can see how I separated into the different programs. So I left obviously the exterior areas a little bit more towards the waterfront so you can enjoy the views. I got together the educational spaces, theaters are next, and then fitness and dining. So they're all kind of in these different volumes
but then they create this hybrid connection with the landscape. I also tried enhancing the circulation, even though there is a pedestrian path along this waterfront. There's nothing really interesting about it at the moment. So with this new building, I'm trying to persuade more of this circulation, as well as enhancing the existing views, because there are beautiful views now. You just can't really enjoy them from the existing building. And then let me share my video.
Cool.
Okay, so let me go back to the previous. So on the floor plans, you can see I pretty much stacked up these volumes and the separations of the different programs. So you can start really, the building, you can kind of enjoy it in all these different levels, not only on the top landscape, but also on the first level.
Okay, like 1 more minute, Monica?
Say that again?
About 1 more minute?
Okay. Section cut through the fitness area. This is section cut through the theaters. And then I'm gonna skip through this renders because you saw them in the video so that I can get to the last part. Here's a action that I did, again, showing the existing and the new and how they all connect. And then the different volumes that were created and extruded from the cube. And then finally we get to the Felix Candela precedent. It is the Fernandez factory, again, a conoid sawtooth vault. And this was what my inspiration for my landscape, with the connection of my actual cube. And then here, the last slide is just kind of the connection of all the different pieces, the cubes, the new landscape, and then all the program into it. And then that's the end of it.
Great. All right, so why don't you take us to a good overview image, Monica?
Okay. Does this work? I can go back to the
That's great.
diagrams.
So this is next to the site of the previous project, right next to Anna's.
Yes, right next to it.
Monica, the question that I must have missed when you said it, you took the existing brick warehouse building and then did you demolish it and reconstruct it, or what did you do to the existing building?
You can actually see it better on one of the diagrams. So let me get to that. But I kept some of the facade, as you can kind of see on this
Like that.
render.
Well, yeah, just hold it right there. Hold it right there. And then just tell us, so what is original and what's new?
So the facade facing towards the waterfront, I pretty much recycled those and cut into some of the facade, creating, so it would actually connect to my design. But the facade is the existing brick facade from the previous building. And then I just continued it throughout.
Wait, I'm just going to ask you a couple of yes/no questions.
Okay.
Did you leave any of these walls standing from the original building?
Yes.
Okay, like the ones facing the waterfront and the street?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
And then the other walls are made of the existing brick, but just rebuilt in new walls?
Yes.
Okay.
And most of the building is actually following the existing actual footprint. I carved into some of the spaces, but most of it does follow that existing footprint.
Yeah, got that. No, that makes sense. No, I think it's a really fantastic project. I love that you've taken this existing building and you've treated it as a site, and that you've retained part of it and transformed other parts of it. It's a lot like the attitude that you and that Anna had toward the inlet itself, the channel, right, where you keep parts of it and then you transform it. I think it's a fantastic strategy. The one thing that I wanted to mention too, and I don't know if I'm totally wrong about this, but it has to do with the importance of Candela to all of your projects, which is that for Candela, especially for your precedent, right, all of that sort of sculptural magic is happening in a roof that is suspended a full story above the ground, and that creates that great, clear span space. But that at the ground level, basically and in your case, it's like it's a factory or workshop, right? That the space below is simply a big rectangle, and that's it, right? It's just a big rectangle in plan. And actually, It's a rectangular volume too, if you go upward, and it doesn't deviate from the orthogonal until you get to the roof. And the roof deviates from the orthogonal because it's a more efficient way of using the concrete. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the basic logic of Candela. And so what I would then want is, I guess from each of you in the class, an explanation as to where this deviation comes in. So what I mean by that is that in your project, and don't get me wrong, this is an absolutely gorgeous project, really beautiful, but you've started using solid walls as structure, which is not a part of the original project. And you've also started introducing much more complex forms that may or may not be able to stand on their own as concrete shells. And so what I'm getting at is why that or when you do that deviation, why? Because in the Candela project, again, the only time he deviates from, in your case, the only time he deviates from the orthogonal is to get an even more efficient use out of the concrete and to produce more daylight coming from above, right? So these are like optimally efficient and economical gestures. They're totally functional that then produce something beautiful and sculptural. I guess what I'm getting at is that for each of these projects that deviates from that logic, why would you do that in that particular case? But and I guess part of the reason for that is that I'm looking at your racquetball court and your basketball court, and I'm wondering, like, why are you doing that? I mean, these things, they're designed to be rectangular, right? I mean, these are made to be rectangular spaces. Why deviate from that? Or what do you get for that deviation? Because there are places here that are really spectacular, like in the performance spaces. I think there, the way that they open up with those views to both Queens and Manhattan, those are really fantastic. So those are the ones that I get. I guess I just don't get like what's happening in the sports spaces.
Yeah, they do deviate. I understand what you are saying. When I started designing these spaces, it was following my deviation, let's call it that, to the cube, and then actually using more of the spaces from the cube than from Candela. So I switched from Candela to the cube, and then that's where I kept mostly. And then I brought Candela back in into the landscape. But I kept following cubes because they created such beautiful spaces that I couldn't say no. And one of the reasons why I have the basketball court being a different shape is because there's not really rectangular spaces in my cube. And it was really difficult to bring something like that into it because it just didn't go with the rest. So that's why I kept connecting it to the cube.
I could say, okay, that's one of those things where I think just as an architect, one of the things to be aware of is when you've started to follow a whole sort of linear path, like you've constructed a kind of a narrative for yourself, and just be aware of when you've sort of pushed yourself into a corner. And then, because in this case, you don't need that, right? Like those spaces don't need that geometry, I don't think. I understand the process that led to them,
Yeah.
but it's an abstract process that was external to the project. It did not, it was before you had a site, it was before you had a program. So it's external to all of the logic that you have with you on site. Your response to site, I think, is terrific, right? With the building, taking the existing building, but it's like you came into this thing with a cast of characters that you felt compelled to use. And in the case of those sports spaces, you just don't need that. Or I think what you should do then is the one next step of development would be to find a way to incorporate those really interesting idiosyncratic geometric forms, find a way to make them work with that space. Because the next step then is to look at like there's plenty of, most basketball arenas are not rectangular buildings, like the American Airlines arena isn't. There's a reason for that, and mostly has to do with seating, right? So maybe that's where you introduce the complex curves and things in your project.
Yeah, and David, I would just add to that, Bernard Schumi always said, if people hired me to do a theater, they didn't really want me to mess with their black box theater, but they didn't care what I did with the zone between the theater and the street. And that may be the place to, like introduce these things and maintain the identity of both, Monica.
Yeah, the egg yolk is fixed, but you get to design the egg white, and the thing I agree with all of David's comments. I love the strategy. I love the adaptive reuse. I love the ensemble of characters, like in a language that's about continuity so much. Like I think this project really produces a lot of discontinuity that is nice. But yeah, it feels not super disciplined in the way that you're making design decisions right now. And the thing that jumped out to me was, the Candela precedent is all about bringing light down into that space using the structural logic. And so I was wondering if there was a way to like understand where the points are, like a field of points in this existing building, and then use those as a kind of governing grid to help make decisions, and then balance out the ideas of the program. Like it's at a certain point you just have to design a basketball court. and
Yeah.
use that rectangle as a governing sort of logic. And there's probably a few other elements of your program that you could just take and copy paste, and those become part of your grid. And they'll actually make the shapes even richer. So yeah, I think it's a great project, and I totally love the strategy as well. But it feels like there's another layer of reality added to this that would make it even better.
Okay.
So I would encourage you to sort of embrace that and not see it as a roadblock.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a few minutes left. If Sarah and Albert want to, pitch in anything, I'll just say that this building didn't exist a week ago, and it's just this is so much more disciplined, Mark, than it was a week ago. And I just want to commend you, Monica. Like I think you've done a really great job. Last minute making significant changes and really, getting this to this point. I agree. I think it's a really compelling project. And of course, there's always things to do, but great work.
Thank you.
I mean, I'll just quickly say I really enjoyed the project section. I thought there's some really amazing spaces that you're creating, and I would definitely continue to push that further, and maybe a little bit more articulation on the exterior for me of materiality and structure, and understanding how some of those open spaces are enclosed would help me a lot. But the sections were beautiful.
Thank you.
I think you have basically, you guys have covered everything. I was actually going to ask you about the edge connecting to the water, and maybe I missed a comment or something about the explanation on what you're thinking for that. I hear that you want to render that area more accessible for people, and create spaces there that can connect to views, etc. But do you have some images that talk more about that relationship, or have you planned, how these corridor around can actually manifest into potential spaces that people can use in different ways, with different points of views to the city or relationship to the building beyond the entrance points that you have created?
So when I first started designing this, I actually tried to bring the landscape kind of into the water, like a blending. And I really like the idea of like how it could come out of the water and continue. And it wasn't just a building, but it was just like a whole site connection. But I kind of stepped away from it a little bit because I did struggle to keep that idea and make everything else that I had to do. But I would have to keep thinking about it a little bit more and see how I can create and bring that idea back into the project.
Great. Thank you, Monica. Great work.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you. So we're going to move on to Jennifer now.
Yeah.
Guys, we have 3 more projects before our lunch break. I don't know if anyone needs like just a quick 2-minute break before we start, maybe to run to the bathroom or refill your car. Okay, we'll keep going. Let's go.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Brass, and thank you for joining our class today. For the past year, we have studied Felix Candela's hyperbolic umbrella structures from the High Life Textile Factory, which I'll mention later on in the project. Throughout the study, I had the opportunity to design a form-finding hyperbolic structure that will serve as a community center in Hunters Point in New York. I chose Hunters Point South Park Extension because my precedent, which is located in Mexico, was in such a dense area that I kind of wanted to do the opposite in New York and just bring more a free area space to bring in this community and bring in more people into that area. As you can see, the building covers most of the site. According to my topography research from last semester, I have found that my site varies in ground elevation. This is one of the key factors that I kept in mind while designing the building elevation. Another key factor I kept in mind was the various paths that came across my site. As you can see, there's an automobile, bike, walking, and running paths in which are all incorporated and can be accessed within the site. The design is divided into 3 groups, which consist of leisure, recreational, and educational. And within these groups, the program is distributed accordingly, as you can see here in the 3D program and in the section. On the ground floor, you can see that you have the gym with its respective locker rooms and showers, outdoor classrooms over here, skate parks, and in the center, the playground. The auditorium, the community bookstore, running track, racquetball courts, indoor classrooms, cafe, and digital library are all located in the second floor. And let me digress into my video real quick so you guys can see a little bit more of those spaces. Sorry. Go back to PowerPoint. So here is the High Life Textile Factory that I mentioned earlier. You can see that there is a very prominent features in my design as I used the hyperbolic 1.5-inch thick roof system in a various amount of ways in my design as roofs and floors. And the solid walls are also perforated with the same 1x1 square pattern that Candela used as a way to bring natural light into the spaces. The form finding process of the community center all began with the formation of my 16 by 16 by 16 cube. I took the High Life Textile hyperbolic umbrella and divided it into 3 high parts, as you can see here. Then I shifted the 2 high parts up and down to create 3 levels, which that done, I started to create those shifting high parts and started connecting it within the actual space of the cube to create the final cube, as you can see here. From there, I started analyzing the high bars and I started to see which ones run smoothly Then I selected those two hypars, as you can see here, where I chose to bring them down and start rotating them to also start accounting for program and to see where I can start putting planar surfaces so I can make spaces available for the program. And here are some more detailed views of those features. As you can see here, you can see the hyperbolic floors. The hypars are used for the auditorium, slope. Here are the details that I was mentioning of the perforated walls. And here you could see the hypars for the skate park as well. And this concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time.
All right, thanks, Jenny. Can you take us to an overview image?
Sure. I could put the program.
Sure. So this one, it's interesting, and it's come a long way in the last week also. And I'll just say, you know, based on the conversation we just had, I appreciate seeing this one in the context of the others. It's a unique application where the hypars aren't a field that exists everywhere, but kind of like we were just discussing, you know, the programmatic boxes that need to remain boxes exist in that way. And these are applied at the landscape as transitions between building and landscape and as roof structures, and they're primarily supported by glazing so that intermediate zone remains vertical for the most part. Did you do that? I mean, was that an intentional?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it works. I mean, it's not what I expected this to look like in the end, but you know, I think there's a really clear organization here. Possibly some, you know, still some places where you could introduce it more, but I like the kind of analysis of, you know, where can I use these things, these hypar surfaces, and then where do I, you know, maintain an orthographic organization. I like also, Jenny, I'll just say, I like how you broke down the site, you know, into these 4 pathways and kind of considered it from that perspective. Could you maybe show us like where your building meets these pathways, how it meets them, and what the connections are?
Yes, as you can see here, these lines are mostly the ones that connect those paths within the building. And I could show you in the render. Let me see. Oh, there. Here, as you can see, this site circulation, you can come from your automobile from this side and enter the site. You can come on this walking path and enter the playground, or you can enter that auditorium. And yeah, that's basically where all the circulation would go from the site.
I'm going to say something stupid, which is it feels very Miami to me. I have no idea. Like, there's something open and informal and light, and I mean, except for like the kind of corporate curtain wall detailing. Like, if you just deleted all that, there's something that's a really, I guess, a kind of nice light touch to the project, which I think maybe is where Nick was headed with some of his comments. And I like the fact that that the sort of hypar could yield something that's somehow predominantly orthogonal, because in some ways that's the strength of it, at least in Candela's work, is sort of the registering of the orthogonal against the hypar, the sort of curvilinear moments. Yeah. So yeah, I like there's also something that's kind of like an exploded Maison domino, like scattered throughout the site. Like if you took Maison domino and then added hypar moments to connect it. it's curious. Yeah, it's like a curious modernist thing.
Just to connect with that, I had also some feelings of modern, I don't know, Brazilian concrete architecture somehow. I think the most successful part for me is where your building is not only having enclosed areas, but I think in this classroom zone where you have outdoor classrooms and indoor classrooms, and I think that's quite interesting to me, how, you know, the structure, it's, you know, only about horizontal elements that are covering and kind of relating to the ground, and then there are some areas that are enclosed that are also connected to that. So I think that specific area in the project, it's quite interesting. I wish there would be more of a stronger relationship to these paths, because I think they're also a great opportunity to connect, you know, to connect flows and people, and you know, and then I also wonder if, you know, I think it's interesting also to have created this courtyard, right? And how, you know, buildings are around it, and there's a community, and there's a, you know, there's a lot of potential in that ground. And I wonder, you know, about the landscape, or how you manipulate the land there, if, you know, there could be a more conscious dialogue between that landscape and the buildings that are around, and the creation of these plaza, right? That looks to the buildings, and that buildings can actually also look into. And also how maybe, you know, a zone with more dense trees could play an interesting role, just like one of the volumes you are adding. Also, one natural area shaded could be also something, you know, interesting to look into. You know, I think you have some interesting explorations in terms of space, but then again, the edge is not. I think you have not thought about exactly what is it that that edge wants, and how you connect to the water. I mean, there's one moment in the project that is engaging the water, but it seems very shy compared to what, you know, the potential of the project has.
Yeah, that's a good point. I also think, Jenny, maybe to begin to manipulate the path that exists. I mean, you're right, you know, you're identifying the four circulation paths, but as those start to merge with your project, I could see you, you know, revising them, improvising them, reinventing them, and connecting to them in new ways that change them. But I think it's a really smart, it's a very smart approach, and it's clear. I mean, I can diagram your project in my mind. It's clearly organized. So I applaud that. Did we lose Jenny?
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Let's give her a minute. Here she is.
Sorry, Professor, my internet connection went off.
That's okay. Can you share your screen one more time?
Yes, I'm so sorry.
Don't worry. We have a few minutes left.
I just wanted to say something really briefly about it, because I totally agree, especially with what Sarah was saying. One thing that I wanted to add, though, was that when you guys are diagramming these programs, you know, whatever the disposition of your program and your project, consider the program as a series of conversations between these different elements, both internally within the project and then externally outside the project. And so, for example, inside the project right now, because you've got the building divided into these three pavilions, there's not much of a conversation between them. And Sarah was talking about the courtyard space that's created, but the courtyard space is a little bit kind of, it's being treated almost indifferently by these three pavilions that are all sort of floating above it. So instead, if they, I mean, start to seek those connections between program elements, and one that would leap to mind is that if you want to have an outdoor terrace outside the theater, then maybe it should connect to the cafe, because the cafe could also use an outdoor terrace. And you could also imagine this as one of those places where you know, at intermission in the performance, this is where you come out to some kind of catered event. But having said that, the more important thing to me is always how this thing connects to the world outside.
Right.
And so there's a logic to it, right? Where each of these elements, some things like a theater, when you're using the theater, when you're inside the theater, most of the time they'll have a big curtain drawn because the whole point is to focus on what's happening on the stage, to control the lighting, all of that. So it doesn't necessarily make sense to put the theater out on the water where it has the unobstructed 270-degree views of city around it. It makes more sense to bring the theater, I think, deeper into the site. Likewise, you have, I think, the racquetball court out with this great view, but you're not really looking at the view when you're playing racquetball unless you're losing. So the point is that maybe something like the cafe should be out closer to the water and these other things should be in. So there's a logic like that. And then the bigger one also is always the connection. So Hunters Point right now, and that whole East River waterfront is undergoing this multi-decade transformation where each of these areas, as they are developed, get this fantastic waterfront park. And you're right at that joint, that juncture, where the park to the west and north of you is developed and to the east of you is not. So you have a chance to design that fantastic connection between a park that exists and a park that will exist in the future. And so that's also something to take advantage of on a site like this. Right now, you're just treating it as sort of like empty space to the east of you, but try designing that juncture and imagining what the rest of this park could be like.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you, David. And I think I think I'll keep us moving so we stay on schedule. But great work, Jenny. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the feedback.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, next up we have Alejandra.
Hello, my name is Alejandra Serra, and this is my project. For my president, I started the acoustic band show by Felix Candela. This is a structure that was built in a public square. It was basically meant to be for presentations or just gatherings. It consists of 3 folded high parts and is located in Mexico City in a community of apartments. An interesting characteristic of this structure is that for it to be cantilevered in this way, as you can see in the section, it has a big concrete block that holds it into the ground. And also another characteristic is that all of the high parts go from, since it's a folded one, they go from vertical to horizontal and they extend outwards. So for the cube, I brought the same idea. I created like a volume in the center, and then from the outsides, I folded the high parts inwards from vertical to horizontal. So for my project, I chose Hunters Point, this park right here, because I think it's an area that could benefit from the program of the recreational center. And it already has some aspects of it, like a playground right here and a basketball court, and just like a green open area. So I brought back one of the elevations from my cube, and I exploded some lines to kind of pull the water into the site and create the location of all the programs. So then I basically pulled the water towards the side, and then from this side, I connected it to the city. And then in the center, in the void that it's right here, I created the project. So all of these triangles right here are high parts that are coming in the same way as the cube, like from vertical to horizontal towards this volume right here. And some of the areas are like, they're combined inside with outside. So it's that's kind of the hybrid structure of the project. These are the shapes that I came up with. And then here I place a program. So I have the skate park the gym, the theater, educational center, and educational center I have it next to the library because I think they go together. And then the outdoor plaza is not only this part, but it also flows like under the building and on the other side of the building. This is a section through the spaces. All of this, of course, interior, I have it color coded so you can see the program a little bit better. And I couldn't create a video, but I have some renders. This is the entrance of the theater. The theater is a little bit separate from everything else and not so connected to the water. This is the library with some green infrastructure in one of the high bars to occupy one of those. This is the skate park with the gym and all the outside areas. And this is I extended one of the high bars towards the water so they can also enjoy the view from this side of the river towards Manhattan. That's here. Can you hear me? I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I was asking, do you have an overview image that you could show of the whole project?
I have the accent with the program, which is that.
One thing I think is not clearly coming through in this, I know your project, I'm more familiar with it, is, you know, the transition from the vertical on the perimeter to horizontal on the interior. Is there a good view that shows that for the guests?
I guess only the renders. All of the vertical pieces are on the outside of the building.
Okay.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, you're taking this sort of ensemble of programs and you're trying to glue them together with the high par technique. Is that right? And is there like a landscape or something that moves through the building? I'm interested in the joints between the major elements of the program. And I'm curious if you have views that speak to that.
I don't think so. I have a section, but I don't know if that's what you mean.
Well, the thing that, like, one of the potentials of the high par for me is that you could create a kind of, at moments in the site, you could create a legible distinction between the elements, right? So you know where each of the major parts of the program are. And then you have another logic that is more about continuity or blurring the distinction between them that occurs at the joints, that speaks to a larger public or civic amenity or landscape or something that really takes advantage of the waterfront. And so the way your project appears right now, and I think there's some really nice moments and elements, and I feel like you have some real sensibility in the way that you're making form and space. So kudos to you. But it feels right now like a big convention center. And not that that's a bad thing, but we think of convention centers as sort of large, kind of generally flexible, undifferentiated spaces. But I don't think that's what your project is. And I'm just curious more specifically about how the elements of the program relate to each other into sort of a larger ambition of the project.
Yeah, I think that's a good comment. It is a little surprising how large the scale looks, Alejandra.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's a misimpression of the. It's just a result of the renderings and the ones that you've chosen. Because if we look at the plan, you have these narrow courtyards that cut in, and you have a very diffuse boundary to the project that is just kind of missing in some of these views. And I think That's what Mark is asking for, like the joints between the segments of program. And what do they look like also? You know, I think it would be interesting to see those. Can you show us your plan one more time?
I have the first floor. Wait. You can only see.
I mean, by the way, dude, those are beautiful views. Very good.
Yeah, that first interior view that looks like a kind of a grand stair, that's the most convincing part of the project that I saw of anything you presented. Like it's really compelling.
Yeah.
That one?
Yeah. And that could be, you know, this could be the landscape just moving up into the building.
Yeah, because it starts to feel like potentially on the left side of that, there's something happening that's a part of one space. And then the next piece of program is on the right. And then there's something that is about the site that's happening between them, that's creating another kind of space, the joint between. And that's where a lot of the high power action is working. And it's just, yeah, it's an exciting moment in the project. And the way that you set this up and the way that you're presenting it, and even I think some of the suggestions in the drawings would be that there's more of that happening.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe you can just go back to your site diagram one more time, Alejandro, with the program overlaid on the site.
The axon or the actual lines on the side?
Yeah, either one. I don't. Show me the axon. What did that look like? Even this. This is not an axon, right?
Well, 3D view, I guess.
This is a 3D view. It looks like a site plan to me, but anyway. Oh, there, it changed. Okay, yeah, go back to the plan.
Oh, that's why. That?
Sorry, it's
Just I think it's a little behind on your.
I think there's a lag, yeah. I think your site diagram. This is fine. Either one of these things. If you just look at the scale of these things, you know, the gym in relation to this, they're just large elements. And I don't know in the plan if, you know, I think you're just codifying like the volume. I don't know that the program would really take up that much space.
No, I think because I'm not occupying the whole high part. Part of the high part is like creating an outdoor space, and then part of the high part is creating the interior space. So maybe that's why they look huge, but they're not like all occupied.
Yeah, I still think you should add to your renderings. I mean, like these, I know that there are like deep courtyards that go into this, you know, like the path does this, and then it does it from this out here as well, you know. And I think these could be really great spaces in here.
Yeah, maybe, you know, something that could come even before this diagram is the diagram of the actual outdoor spaces. Because you're saying that outdoor plaza that is along the water, it's also kind of folding in or below or through the buildings, right? So that's at least how I understood it from your presentation. So if that's happening, I think that's one of the most interesting moves that you're doing. So seeing how that it's flowing inside the buildings or through the buildings, I think it would be quite interesting. And I think I wouldn't treat the skate park as a, you know, as this purple thing, you know, in that corner, but actually as part of that plaza. And, you know, because it has the potential of participating into these very dynamic surfaces. Yeah, I guess that's sort of what I would like to see, you know. Also, what Mark was saying about that entrance, also when I saw that image, I thought the same. Is that the gym? Is that
It's a theater complex.
Is the theater? Okay, okay, got it. So I guess that is actually part of this plaza, of this outdoor, that it's
So it's on this side, and the plaza goes under the theater. But I guess I didn't show it.
But somehow that entrance, it's part of that public way. So, you know, it's crawling inside the buildings as well. So I think a diagram like that would be quite cool to see. And somehow it would also address a little bit, you know, the idea of what is happening in all the space that is not exactly a program space. And hold on a second. I guess you wanna also put a little more emphasis on the development of the floor plans. Right now they are a little bit hard to read. Maybe we saw them too quickly, but you know, the ground level is missing a lot of dash lines of the overhead conditions, for example. So that's something that it would be great to develop. Maybe I missed it because we
actually. I have the volumes that are above those spaces. So this area is basically the public plaza, all of this, and the entrance of the theater is right here. So it goes above this area. But I guess, yeah, I need to represent it
a
better.
little bit more about the complexity of these roofs or surfaces that are happening in the plaza, right? And how the buildings are also reaching the ground. Are these the only moments where they reach the ground? Are they touching the ground in some other way for structure? But I do think you have very interesting spatial moments, and I would also take more into consideration the idea of playing with the ground and how you can, you know, create a dialogue between the buildings and the actual ground. Right now, it feels very flat and almost like a missed opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to quickly say, it seems like in your drawings you have these really separate volumes, these massings, and like these walls in between. And maybe a solution to kind of integrate it better would be to separate those massings a little bit, and then you can use those in-between spaces as potential landscape, elevated landscape spaces to maybe, or even circulation into the building. It might be an interesting way to kind of break up those like sheer walls that you have in between, and then use that space for something else.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. Great progress, Alejandro. I think the views they're beautiful. I mean, it's a nice formal resolution to the project. I think, you know, the issues of scale and connectivity, a little more time, you can resolve those things.
Yeah, I think it took me a while to get to this. Then, of course, I ran out of time, but I'll keep working on it.
It's a beautiful project. Fill in some of those gaps for the booklet, but you know, great work. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, good work. We have one more before the lunch break. Jodel, are you in the house?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
All right.
All right. It says that I cannot start screen sharing. Oh no, because
Go ahead.
the screen share. My bad.
Try now, Jodel.
All right, I'm good now. Yeah. All right. Good morning, guys. My name is Jodel, and I'm starting right now. Okay. So, from what we know in architecture, a hybrid is a combination or intervention that represents building, landscape, and infrastructure. So my goal was to take those hypers that I studied and break them down and combine them within the landscape itself. I from New York. I picked Hunters Point South Park, which is the north, the furthest down. it's very isolated, and I really like that it was really by itself on a corner, and it's really big and vast, and because of the water's edge condition, that will give me the opportunities to cover more water frontage area, and the paths, which are the pedestrian and the bicycle path as well, they will go within my project, and they will provide public views across the bay, and the water's edge will give me the opportunities as well to create gathering spaces next to the water. As you can see from the site, it has a downward topography. It goes down towards the water. Here you can see from my site diagram the different circulation path. The red, which is the major road where cars goes by, and the yellow, which is the pedestrian path, and the blue, which is the bicycle path. And those two paths, the pedestrian and the bicycle, they they um they combine at the end right here, and they become one. So that is telling me that somebody on a bicycle can use both paths as well. And here I divided my program into three main groups: the educational, media, and recreational. I placed my recreational near the water to allow people to feel this peace when they stay by the water. They can exercise, and here you can see the circulation through my project, where the path goes through my whole project, and it goes by every building or construct, and it creates like this kind of a flow through my whole construct. And here I have my landscape spaces. As you can see, I'm combining my my hypers with my landscape and my green spaces. Here I have my site plan where you can see the different materials and the vegetation. And you can see I'm really considering the water's edge condition by really extruding into the water itself. In my video, one second. Uh, Sorry about that. Give me one second. Okay. All right. This is a quick walkthrough of my project. As you can see with the paths, I make sure to integrate them within the site. So I'm using the existing path. And here is my library space, my digital library space. My skate park right here, which is the core of my project. It's in the middle. And here, where it extrudes over the water. Okay. All right. So going back to Felix Candela, my precedence was Rio's Warehouse. Rio's Warehouse was completed in 1954. It's a total of 36 high port umbrellas, and this project is located in Mexico. As you can see here, how it was constructed. The quadrant, one point from the quadrant was then moved down or moved on a different axis to create the high part. So I'm following those same conditions in my project as well. And following my cube, I try to stay within the umbrella construct. I went by different levels. Here, as you can see, it has the shape of the umbrella itself. And I try to place them as on different levels, trying to go upward. So I'm progressing on a upward motion, I would say.
Great.
And here, from that, I took the cube, the elevation, and I placed it on the site. And I tried to keep in mind those paths as well to make sure that they interact with my project. And here you can see my renderings and my views, the overall project, certain spaces on the bottom. I have the gym area, which is near the water, and some rendering details where you can see my elements, my skating park elements, a canopy right here, and the inside of my library and my bookstore. And I do have some boards. I do have some more drawings. 1 second.
Thank you, Judo.
I do have the boards.
Where? Okay.
All right, right here. Okay. So I explained this already, which is the site. Here is my floor plan, my ground floor plan. As you can see, I'm not going down to the gym because the gym is at a lower level. So you can only see the ground of the digital library and the bookstore and the theater right here. My sections, the first one is through the library, and then the second section, which is a long section throughout the whole project, going to the bay, to the water. Here are my different diagrams where I showed the division of the 3 main groups of the project. And here you can see the programs as well. And the skate park, which is the center, which I explained. And I have my racquetball courts near the skate park and close to the water as well. Circulation, I spoke about that. And my renderings. Yeah. The cube. Yeah. And yeah, that is all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Judo. All right. So we have about 15 minutes left. This is the same site that we saw on Jenny's project. Can you go back to maybe your final overview, Judo? Sarah, I'm curious what you think, given your comments about, the edge between the water and the site, what you think here.
So here I am. I was actually trying to also kind of understand what the site right north is. That's an empty lot, is it, at the moment?
It is, yeah.
Construction.
It'll be developer towers and things like that.
They're planning on doing residential buildings. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I was actually thinking it's in general your site plan seems to be very balanced, right? You've chosen these polygons that are sort of really nicely kind of working together in this geometrical pattern, and then some of the polygons are changing material, changing elevation. I think there is something really nice about how you are composing, the overall space and floor plan, and then how you are connecting also the paths. And there's never like a moment where you think the path is kind of killing the space, because it's very well located in a place where you might be kind of a crossing a space, but there's always room for activities that are not interrupted by the path. So I think circulation and flows and spaces versus built feels all very in balance, and I really enjoy that from your project. I also think there's a really nice rhythm of going through these shaded areas and going out from them. So your video is also kind of picturing these flows around the site. And I think that's also quite interesting. And I do think the edge, it's, you know, I like to see that you didn't make any comment on that, but I see clearly how you are marking some areas for pedestrians and for people to be accessible, and then some other areas are more these green patches, right? And
Yes.
I what I interpret from the green patches is that you are kind of trying to pull in native vegetation and sort of thinking about these potential living edge that might contribute to the more sustainable treatment of that edge, right? So I would maybe, Jodel, something you might do is to
Mm-hmm.
a little more texture on that green patch, just like you're trying to picture some texture of materiality on the areas where you know, people would go. Show
Okay.
more texture and diversity along that edge. It doesn't need to, you know, change color necessarily, but we want to see diversity and think that there might be different ecosystems, you know, happening over there. Same thing with the green patches that are around. You could put more emphasis in some areas, right? And that those areas might be, you know, creating more shade. Some areas are actually creating, I don't know, other textures for the site. But right now, the green seems to be all very homogeneous. That's where I'm going.
Okay.
So if you want to create a little more diversity in there, but I do think you have a quite cool overall view of the project. Can you?
Yeah, I agree. I think the project's really sophisticated. Sorry, Sarah, finish your
No,
thought.
no, 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 no. You can go. I was just gonna ask him, Jodel, to just go ahead and move through his slides, but you can keep going.
Yeah, the thing I found curious is compared to a lot of your colleagues is
Mm-hmm.
he took the lessons of the three-dimensional study and turned it into a two-dimensional pattern on the site. So you sort of misread your original work, and I think it actually worked in your project. And the part that I was thinking is usually we get on students for designing like they're in a helicopter or like the God view or the top view. But somehow in New York on these sites, especially in the future when there's tall buildings next to it, considering the site as like a horizontal facade, it seems to make sense to me, like the kind of the graphic from looking at the park from high above makes a lot of sense. So this is really kind of curious to me, the way that you developed the project in a good way. And I think then it seems like you took the HYPAR as a kind of more generalized strategy and just sort of attacked it like an architect and just made space and sort of dealt with the building as a problem and that sort of thing. So I really appreciate the project a lot. I think it seems really thoughtful and thorough and plausible, which I think is actually to be commendable, especially for a thesis project.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with all those comments, Joel. I think for me, the strongest part of your project is the buildings, the architecture you developed. The spaces on the inside are really beautiful, and these sections are really, really nice. I also think in plan, the overall composition of your site plan, I think is really quite beautiful. The proportions and the way that you developed it is really nice. My main comment I would say about that is it seems like there's a lot of impervious surface or a lot of like very heavy material on a site that used to be mostly green. So I would say maybe a little bit more articulation of the landscape design and some of those surfaces. You know, you can use different types of materials or impervious concrete. Maybe it's some landscape strategies. And I think this kind of talks a little bit about what Sarah was saying. When you articulate that edge condition with different types of plants and ecosystems, it could just be a change in like the way that you're drawing and plan like a hash pattern or something and develop those contours. Every little change in elevation is going to have a different type of plant species that can be used for cleaning water or giving back to the site in some capacity. So I definitely think this is a very successful project, and the overall scheme is great. I really like the forms that you developed in both plan and in section, but I would just say a little bit more articulation on the landscape architecture piece and the surfaces would definitely take it to that next level.
All right, thank you.
Actually, I do want to add one thing though, and I don't want to sound incredibly negative, but this is, it relates to what Mark, Sarah, and Albert have just been saying about the site strategy. This is also a comment too. I want to say this is for everybody in the class who has chosen any part along Hunters Point South Park, right? Which is this really extraordinary project. I assume that you guys all visited this, right? As part of your site visit. And it's a project by Weissman Freddy Architects and SWA Balsey, I think was the landscape architecture firm. There's a lot of amazing things about the project. And I guess the question for anybody who is going to alter it is always, what was wrong with it, right? What was wrong with this project that you needed to transform it? And in the case of this project too, one of the things that's really powerful about it is such a great work in light of the kind of resilience questions that we face in terms of sea level rise and climate change. Because this is a park that's designed to deal with problems of, sudden storm, really intense storms. So when you've got a lot of rainwater falling and it's moving very quickly into the river, this is a park that's designed to retain a lot of that rainwater runoff to prevent flooding. And it's also designed around 100-year floods and things like that. I mean, this project is really quite good. I think it's won awards based on this. And one of the things that a lot of you guys are doing is, like Albert is saying, you're just like covering this stuff with concrete, which is like a 1970s strategy that will lead to disaster, right? I mean, this is like Houston during Hurricane Harvey, or, well, Miami during any serious rainfall now. So this is a question I think for all of you guys, is that if you've got a project like this that is already a really exquisite landscape that's designed around questions of resilience and sea level rise and all, why alter it? And if you're going to alter it, how are you making it better? True. And it's not really a question posed to you, Jodelle. I mean, it's really a question to all of us who work in coastal communities. It's a really serious issue for all of us.
Thank you.
All right.
No comments, Professor?
Yeah, we're here for lunch break, Jodelle. I really have to personally applaud you, man. It's come a long way, and I'm thrilled to see like the resolution of this. Great comments, good questions for you going forward. I agree with those things, and I think you did all along have an idea about the topography and the role of water. I think you primarily stay above it with these platforms. I think there was some idea of engaging, a tidal zone, but anyway, it's just great to see it in the state that it is, given where it was a week ago, man. Like, great work hustling and putting this together. I'm proud of you. So great work.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to our jurors. I know we're going to lose Sarah for the afternoon. But yeah, that was a great morning session, guys. We have a mandatory lunch break. Ordinarily, Mark, I'm sorry, you would get a Jimmy John sandwich, but not this year.
Oh, bummer.
So we will start at 1 o'clock sharp. Tim is going to present next at 1, so we'll have that all queued up. And then we have about 20 minutes per student, and then we'll end at 4. And we have 8 more. So thank you all. See you in a little bit.
Thank you. Bye. I'll try to connect kind of as a ghost just to see the rest of the project. But congratulations. I think, overall, they look great and very exciting explorations.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, guys. Talk to you soon.
See ya.
Bye, Sarah.